small. Okay, and they've often been portrayed in books and articles as these big predator carnivores, but they have two features that are problematic for that. One is, although they have the biggest beak in relation to their body size and head size of any bird that ever lived, there's no hook on the tip of the beak. You know, all modern raptors, all fossil raptors we know of, have curved beaks. They use the beak for catching prey, but they also use it as a can opener for tearing through the hide to get at the innards. Diatrima has a big beak, but it has no hook. It also has very short leg bones. Allison Andrews, a paleoornithologist at the American Museum of Natural History, did a PhD dissertation back in, I don't know what, in late 90s, I think. And he looked at all the known skeletal museum records of Diatrima and came to the conclusion that they were walkers. They could not run fast because of the short lower leg structure. And so Dr. Anders suggested they were in fact herbivores, but people didn't buy into it much. And no tracks had ever been found, and we found ours, and we have a total of about 20 of them. There are no claws, there are no talons on the feet. They just have broad toenails. So we spun the story of this was confirming evidence that they were big, gentle herbivores, not carnivores. A year afterwards, we managed to airlift out the slab that Keith was standing by. It weighed 1,200 pounds. We have it on display at the university. We had to wait until we could get a big twin rotor helicopter that had enough lifting capacity, and it came up from Portland to do some river restoration in the area. And the helicopter time in 2010 was $5,000 an hour. We didn't really have any money, but they said if we paid in advance for 15 minutes of time, they would pick up our slab if we had it all rigged and drop it off on a logging road. And Geology Department came up with $1,250 to cover 15 minutes of flight time, and it all worked pretty well. Here's the slab on the back of the truck. The pilot did not realize we wanted them to drop the slab onto the back of a truck. And it turns out one of the difficulties of the big twin rotor helicopter, they cannot look straight down. So they were sort of worried about how much they were going to destroy the university's truck. But they had a guy on the ground with a radioing up to the pilot, telling him inch by inch where to put it. And it took a while, but they did a really slick job. This is part of our volunteer crew that got the slab ready to move. And then we had it at Western for a while till I got a space ready. And Steve James, who was an engineering technician for the tech department, he had a forklift. And so one day him and me got the slab, got it out of storage, got it in the forklift, then got it on a pallet jack, moved it into the building where I had a platform waiting. Between the two of us, we got it mounted on the platform. And then later I went ahead and did the finished carpentry and made the display. And so if you come to Western, it's kind of one of our featured displays. We have a really nice reconstruction painting done by a paleo artist, Marlon Peterson, who did a great job on that. And the slab is open. You can walk up and touch it. It's actually been sealed with a silicone sealer that makes it invisible. I mean, it's invisible, the coating, but it was really valuable because within a month or two of having it, some little kid, I presume it was a kid, somebody spilled a cup of grape juice down the front of the slab. And it was so nice that the slab, in fact, was waterproofed enough that we just washed the purple stain off. Well, of other tracks there, these two tracks are from a crocodile. Crocodiles have interesting feet. They have 4 toes on the front and 5 toes on the front and 4 on the back. So these tracks are front feet. This slab, it's hard to see. We saw this early on. It has a curved line on it. Don Hopkins, he was the Burke paleobotany volunteer. He was really convinced it was a tail drag. I was really dubious. But we later decided, in fact, that it was. It has clawed marks on either side of it. And so this was a crocodile that was swimming in very shallow water. It was just touching down its feet now and then to propel it forward. So the tracks are not in a real right-left pattern like walking or crawling. It's what they call punting, using your feet just to push off and then dragging the tip of its tail in sediment. This slab was within a couple of years was completely destroyed by erosion. I have good photos of it, but it's just gone. This slab up toward the top of the slide is the one that Brennan spotted a little crocodile trackway on. Again, it has a central drag mark. It has clawed feet on either side of it. This is much smaller. It's probably a baby crocodile. The crocodiles for track fossils are spelled with a Y. Sometimes they call them crocodilians, but you can't tell crocodiles from alligators, from caiman. The tracks are not diagnostic, so they call them crocodilians or crocodile with a Y, just indicating there's some kind of crocodile alligator kind of thing. This is another one on a nearby block. Has a tail drag. This one is a 3D cast, and it has clawed footprints by it. We got good casts of these. Mammal tracks are pretty common. You can see this 3-toed track on a slab that has a whole lot of water droplet imprints on it. And these tracks are distinctive in that there are 3-toed tracks and 4-toed tracks together. And that fits the early horses, the Hyracotherium dawn horse, where they had 4-toed feet on the front and 3-toed feet on the rear. So they're commonly called 3-toed horses, but in fact, they're only 3-toed on the rear feet. So they're about the size of a Cocker Spaniel. From the Eocene was before the real evolution of grasslands, and so the little dawn horses were brush dwellers. When grasses evolved, then it made room for these modern grazing animals, where fast running was important, because if the saber-toothed tiger or somebody comes along, you need to run to escape. So fast running became a survival strategy, and you see that in horses and bison and deer and elk and all kinds of these hoofed mammals. They could grow to big size because there's a lot to eat, but their self-defense was running. Hyracotherium didn't need that, so it did fine with toed feet. The other possibility, though, are tapirs, because they have the same 4-toe in front, 3 in back. Their feet tend to be wider, so this top track really looks more like a tapir track than a dawn horse track. Tapirs were very common in the early Cenozoic. They're a living fossil today, but in the Eocene and times around it, tapirs were diverse and abundant, and there were a lot of different types. And I think we're seeing tapir tracks in the Chuckanut when we see these broader tracks. There's another kind of track, we've seen quite a few of these, narrow toes with a distinct claw on the end. We have some good trackways of those to get the pace and body width and things. If they were modern tracks, you might think they were from a raccoon. They're about that size. Hard to say what they were. There's no other known tracks that look like this, but based on the foot bone architecture and size. What they really are a pretty good match for are civet cats, which still live today and have a pretty long history. So we don't really know for sure, but it was something like a civet cat in terms of size and body architecture. One of the early sites that we found, as always, I never find anything. It was reported to me by a rockhound friend, Scanaway. This is a slab along a logging road, although it's a natural outcrop. It was not exposed by the road construction, although the road ran near it. This site, it has like 200 of these circular tracks that look like some kind of a dwarf hippopotamus. And this stretch here shows a trackway where there's kind of a right-left pattern. They're fairly circular. They're kind of indistinct outline. They're probably what I call squelch tracks, where a big round-footed animal was walking in an inch or two of water and left these muddy circular tracks. And Marlon Peterson did a reconstruction of that. The geology, the botany, everything about this painting is based on fossils. The only thing that's imaginary is what color these were. We used a mammal, Coryphodon or Coryphodon, however you want to pronounce it, kind of a dwarf hippo kind of animal. It was really common in the Western US during the early Eocene. So it could have been something else, but something like this is very likely. And I made a latex cast of part of the trackway. And we have that on display at Western next to Marlon's painting. Well, our work at the slide was divided into several activities. Most of the fossils were on big slabs that were impossible to move or collect, with the exception of the one that we got a helicopter to take home for us. We traced trackways. You can get the dimensions, the footprint patterns by tracing them. So that's always an important first step. Here's an example of some of the big bird tracks from the site, showing tracings we made and measurements of angles and things. Same thing with the mammal tracks, a slab and the drawing of the same slab from a journal article that I did. I don't very often do it. I can kind of draw if my life depends on it. I'm mostly too lazy, and now mostly I'm using digital art stuff rather than freehand drawing. But these are some track sketches I did for a paper a long time ago when the world wasn't as digital as it is now. And we made casts of a lot of fossils. So this is me brushing liquid latex on one of the big palm fronds. And the first step is to put on multiple layers of the latex, letting it dry in between coats. And you end up with a really detailed mold, but it's very flexible. Here I am doing another track somewhere else. But in this case, I'm putting on a plaster backing. So the latex captures the detail, but then we have to make a plaster backing or a plaster burlap sandwich backing. And that captures the three-dimensional shape. So the track casting takes several steps done on different days. Here's Keith Kemplin applying the plaster backing to that palm leaf that I was brushing latex on later. So we have several of these tracks, these palm leaves at Western. I did one of them, it hangs on the wall of the Burke Museum. In fact, I think it's actually this track that I made a duplicate for the Burke when they were building a new museum. So here it is, peeling off the latex. You can see the detail that it captures. There's the plaster backing in back that we pulled off. And so we'll take both of those back home and build a frame around it and cast a replica with plaster. So here are the two of the ones we did that are hanging on the wall at Western. and they've been hand colored to try to get them to look more like the original. We sometimes cast tracks with silicone. The disadvantage is it's more expensive, but what we discovered is if we bought enough tubes of hardware store silicone, we could build up layers, and it's thick enough. You could usually do it without needing a plaster jacket. So you could do a silicone mold usually in one day. You'd have to wait around for some hours for it to harden. But here's Dave Tucker doing I think this is a bird track with our hardware store silicone. And the great thing about silicone, the old original silicone formula, it won't stick to anything wet. So we just spray the rock surface with water, maybe sponge it with water, and then we put on the silicone. We discovered later there's a silicone 2 brand version, and it will stick to wet things. And so we have to get the older original silicone, not the silicone 2. But this is a diatrama track, the one we flew out by helicopter, but we did make a cast of it. Here's the first step, filling the track with silicone, and then we'll put a whole silicone layer all around it. This is a different track with mammal tracks and bird tracks. And so this is the plaster replica. And I watercolored this one up to make it darker. It hangs on the wall at Western, and I kind of artificially highlighted it so it would be easy to see from people standing in the hall. This is the replica of the one we flew out. I made copies of this, the half dozen or so people that were really involved with the recovery effort. I gave all of them copies like this one that were framed that they could hang on their wall. Well, we have some new discoveries. I have not worked much in the Chuckanut for years, but every now and then somebody finds something new. So this year we found several new fossils from Racehorse Creek. And so this is like I don't know what, 1,200 feet lower in elevation and maybe, I don't know, best part of a mile distance from the main slide. But the slide was so big, a lot of rocks and logs and stuff came over the waterfall. But there are some local strata exposed along the stream bed. This is what it looks like in summer. It's really quite a nice place. Pretty short hike to get to it. It's not very well known, but people go there. Well, I got an email, what was this, in February, I think, maybe end of January. Some people shown here had been along the stream and said they'd found a fossil fish. So we went the next day, Keith Kemplin and I, and the fossil fish is actually on these pieces here. It's a first fish fossil that's been found from the Chuckanut. The only vertebrate body fossil that's ever been known from the Chuckanut. There's a pond turtle, a cast of a palm turtle shell that was found years ago near Bellingham. We have it on display at Western, but otherwise the animal fossils have all been tracked until the fish. And this is what the fish looks like. It's a very incomplete one, but it's actually a distinctive one. The fin here with the rays in it, it's very close to the tail, and then it's hard to see here, but the tail has a very slight V shape in the end of it. And that's an unusual morphology. And it's for this fish Ferriotis, which is known from the Green River Formation in Wyoming and a few other places. So our fossil is the fin, the tail, and a bit of the body, but it's a unique anatomy. Ferriotis was a kind of a tropical fish, carnivorous fish, probably frogs and anything that came along, but it was basically a carnivore. This is a rock along the stream bed showing one of these sandstone logs. And the arrow shows a slab. Another amateur collector emailed us, said they'd found some diatrima tracks on a slab right by the stream. The waterfall is not very far upstream from here. And so Keith and I found our way to that one. And then I went back with a geology class field trip from Western, and my pictures are mostly from that. But this is in place strata. It's not rock that came over the waterfall. It's from this bedrock right here. This is a field trip. We didn't, when it was planned, know that it was going to snow. It turned out to be a surprisingly wintry trip, but it was pretty fun. But it's what the terrain was like. Not really easy place to look for fossils when the snow covers the ground. This girl is quite pleased. She's found a slab that actually has a little fossil flower on it. Kind of a rare thing. But here are some of the students making their way to the slab where the tracks are. I like to put people to work, so I asked a couple of students to make a plastic, clear plastic tracing of the slab. And here's a girl. We've outlined the tracks in chalk. There's a third one's out here at the end. So it's the first place we found diatrima tracks that are actually in a trackway. The other 20 we found were all tracks where a bird was just kind of standing there milling around. But this potentially gives us some information about body width and leg length and stuff like that. I need to do some more work on that, but we have good data. And this is an example close-up of two of the tracks and picture of reconstruction of the bird that made them. And the bottom is a sketch version we made, kind of hard to see on this slide, but it has the angles and the dimensions and stuff of all the tracks, which is really important to get. Well, I have a couple of other recent papers out. I have a pretty long paper that just came out about trace fossils from the Chuckanut Formation. I had been saving specimens for years, not knowing what, if anything, I would do with them, but I finally decided, as I get older, there's just stuff, if I'm ever going to do it, I better do it. And I suffered from the fact I didn't really know anything about invertebrate trace fossils, so I had a pretty steep learning curve on that. But if anybody's interested in that, to email me, I'll send you reprints. My ResearchGate site has PDF reprints from pretty much all of my papers that can be directly downloaded. So if you're familiar with ResearchGate, researchgate.net, if you go there and type in my name as a search term, you can access pretty much all the stuff I've got. But my email is just mustoe@wwu.edu. So I welcome emails. And this paper had a lot of work. It's a long paper. But I have a newer one that just came out. It's kind of a summary of the work that I've been doing for the last couple of decades about how wood becomes fossilized. And this is another, it's an open access paper. It's like, I don't know what, 49 pages long, I think, with lots of illustrations. If you have any curiosity about how wood becomes silicified, this is kind of my life story of how I think it all works. And last of all is a preview of coming attractions. If you're going to the Paleo Alliance Symposium at University of Victoria in early June, this is the show I'm going to be giving there. I have been working with paleontologists in Australia looking at fossils from the opal mines, which are surprisingly not well understood. And so I think this is my last slide, but anyway, I hope I will see some of you in Victoria later this spring. But hard to find a more spectacular fossil than an ammonite mineralized in precious opal. So that's the end of my show. I welcome questions, comments, whatever. And if you want to unmute yourself and